We're live.
Thanks. Okay, welcome back to Senate Education. We are going to shift gears now from S-248 to S-139, an act relating to public schools team mascots. And we're going to have a walkthrough of this bill. I did hear from a couple of colleagues who were particularly interested in this, so we're going to have a walk through that. Before I turn the floor over to you, Mr. Desmarais, I did want to let the lead sponsor, Senator Hooker, of S-248, I did hear from Senator White, given that would be in a lot of ways a change that would fall under government operations. This might be something that you and Senator White and I kind of navigate the process a little bit. It might be that we hear a little bit more, but I think ultimately that would be something that might end up in government ops. So let's just talk for a few minutes later today about it.
Thanks.
Great. Okay, with that, S-139, Mr. Desmarais, the floor is yours.
Okay, if I could share the screen. Okay, get that centered. How's that? Is it too small?
Nope, terrific.
Great. Okay, this is a very short bill. It is, I will say to you right now, it's quite poorly drafted, which is by me, I believe. This bill has been around for a couple of years. So I'm not going to focus too much on the language, but let's just focus on the intent here. I'll read through A here, 14 through 17. It really is the heart of this. It says public schools shall not have or adopt a name, symbol, or image that depicts or refers to a racial or ethnic group, individual, custom, or tradition, and that is used as a mascot, nickname, logo, letterhead, or team name of the school. It's a lot packed in there for words, but basically schools can't have mascots, for example, that refer to a racial or ethnic group, individual, custom, or tradition. And these other things too, but that basically is what this is prohibiting. So then it repeats that language right here, saying it shall not retain a name, as the same language. I'm not sure what the difference is between have and retain a. So I'm not going to read this through. It's the same as this. I'm not sure it's here. And if I could date some passage.
Okay. Do I see a motion? No, just joking. Let's have just a few minutes discussion about this. I don't know if anybody at this point wants to weigh in, has questions. This is a priority, Senator Perschlick.
And maybe this is the drafting, but like of the recent controversy around Raiders, it seems like Raiders would be allowed, or maybe that's the intent of the draft.
Can you tell us a little bit more? Is that about the Raiders? Just so I know, is that Rutland situation?
It's Rutland, but I think there was another school that also had Raiders and got rid of it.
What was it prior to Raiders?
It was Raiders.
With Raiders, and they got rid of it. There was a recent vote to bring it back.
Right. Okay. So it went from Raiders and then to what?
Ravens.
Ravens and then, okay.
But it seems like language, I don't know if Raiders is a name, symbol, or mean as a racial or ethnic group, an individual, custom, or tradition.
I think it had to do with the history of it, where it was Red Raiders before, and the symbol was a Native American in full headdress. And they changed that several years ago to an arrowhead. Still, the feeling was that it was still tied to Native Americans.
Okay, I didn't know that context, because I know nationally there's been concern about raiders being a reference to Confederates. I thought so.
Yeah.
Maybe that's rebels that I'm thinking
Okay.
And I'd like to know what the VPA is saying about this now.
Okay. Yep. We can have the VPA in to talk to them about this. We've also, it's on my list to have the VPA to come in to talk about language behavior generally at sporting events as well. So we'll have them in next week to weigh in on this.
Okay.
Senator Perchuk, anything else?
No, that's fine. I mean, I guess I'm continue on the Raiders. It seems like if they just didn't have any imagery that connected to Native American, other than the history, you could make an argument. But if the school just said, well, we're just the Raiders, you know, I don't know if you want it to be like the Oakland team that should be remained unnamed because I don't like them. But we probably don't want to emulate pirates either.
Yeah. Senator Terenzini.
Thanks, Senator Campion. I don't think looking at the time, I don't think we probably have time to rehash the last 2 years of Rutland Raiders and Rutland Ravens and the division it's caused in mine and Senator Hooker's community. But looking at the bill, I think that it really opens up, not only those that some people feel are obvious, but then I think of Castleton University has the Spartans, and the Spartans, that's the definition of them is I just looked it up, is of ancient Greece, of Sparta. And so would Castleton University have to be forced to change their name because they're talking about it's an ethnic group or heritage or lineage or whatever you want to call it. But I just think, boy, this is a pretty slippery slope this bill tends to go down, and could get pretty ugly.
Complicated for sure. Complicated, yeah. Senator Chittenden.
So I have many battle scars of the rebel fight in South Burlington of 2016, 2017, and
Right.
Certainly we could bring that into this discussion if we do find time for it. And there's, I think, people that would love to speak on this. I could talk about how the language could help or not have helped that controversy that the community I live in struggled with.
Yeah, we'll continue to have this conversation a little bit. I'm not, unless I have someone that colleagues and on this committee, where if there's a majority, or in our in all the caucuses, I'm not sure if this is going to rise to the priority that, again, COVID, waiting, church and state, and some of the other things rise to, but we can continue to do the work and look into it. It's always one of those interesting things around local and letting folks sort of have that conversation locally, or the legislature having it. It's sometimes these things can, it's and as we've just pointed out, by the few questions and comments, it's complicated. It's complicated. So, Senator Lyons, anything from you on this?
Complicated. I think it's very complicated. And, and I think that we're seeing a lot of activity at the local level and people are resolving it. Sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable. And I know South Burlington went through and others, but it is resolved. It does take time for some of these discussions to happen, and there are always some very emotional arguments and sides, but I'm just not thrilled about taking that one up, to tell you the honest truth.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the honest truth. It sounds, if this is something that people on this committee and others would like to move, there might be some work to do in terms of convincing folks. Again, I'm not saying anything's off the table, but Senator Terenzini.
Yeah, I would concur with Senator Lyons. If you took a straw poll right now, I'd be in favor of leaving this one on the wall and not even touching it. So.
All right. Well, let's give people time to think about it, talk to colleagues, and we can also, I think, dig in a little bit on our own individually. And see what, again, and we'll also get a sense of, how much we get done in the next couple of weeks and what that may open up for us or may, depending on how much if we don't get to everything we need to get, prevent us from moving forward on a couple of things. So, Jim, did you have any other comments about this? Did you want to bring us back a better draft? I mean, those are your words, not mine. Is that?
If you want to see another draft, I'm happy to do one.
No, I was really responding to your concerns, not to anything else at this point. Okay.
Nope, I'm fine.
Okay, great. Senator Hooker.
I know that there was another bill introduced this year in the House, and I don't know if Jim is aware of that one and what it says. But.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll check that out.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Desmarais. Thanks everybody for weighing in. We always want people to have an opportunity to have their bills heard and at least give people an opportunity to either get behind them or not. So with that, I think almost our last piece of business for the day is to take a look at an issue that was raised by Joyce Judy, the president of CCV, with me a few days ago, and that is this refugees and asylum seekers and when and how they can access CCV tuition from our state colleges, et cetera. And so we'll get some more background on this from Tom Little from Vsac, but for now, let's just shift over to Elizabeth St. James to have a look at some language that we ask that you draft.
Sure, good afternoon. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
So in response to committee discussion yesterday, I drafted some language to get you started. And the section in Title 16 that discusses determination of residency for tuition purposes for the Vermont state colleges, which includes the Community College of Vermont, is section 2185. It's a very short section. You can see here A and B were all that were there. The Board of Trustees shall adopt policies related to residency for tuition purposes consistent with state and federal requirements. So most of the residency requirements are in Board of Trustee rules. There has already been a carve out for active duty service members who come to Vermont, who are transferred here for non-educational purposes, and they can be considered a resident for in-state tuition purposes when they get here. And so what I've done to start with is the same thing for, I think we're using the term refugee, and I'm going to come back to why I said using the term in a second. So I've added subsection C, and based on committee discussion yesterday, it sounded like the committee wanted to focus on the Community College of Vermont. So to CCV, so I've limited it here, saying for determination of residency for tuition purposes for the Community College of Vermont. But I will note this statute is applicable to all of Vermont state colleges. So it could be limited, or it could just be left broad and open.
Ms. St. James, I just want to stop you there for a moment, if I may. So are these things that the boards themselves could do? In other words, with the military carve out, was that a board decision or was that a legislative decision?
I mean, it's in law, it's in state law. So I'll go back to the sharing my screen.
Senator Terenzini?
Yeah, I'm looking on our website, Senator Campion, and I don't see this document unless I'm missing it. Is it something that is up there, or?
I don't know if Beth has shared it with Daphne yet.
You did.
Okay, then I'll ask Daphne. Daphne, if you haven't had a chance to put it up, try refreshing. I see a message from Daphne to try to refresh your page.
I'll try that. Thank you.
And if you need me to send it again, Daphne, please let me know. So it's a great question. So, I mean, we can see that this is current state law. So the legislature added this carve out for active duty military members. Whether it was the college that came forward and said, we need this. I don't know the legislative history on this, but it is state law. And it appears in, I did look at the CCV Board of Trustee, the rules on this, and I don't know that I'm the person to speak to that. I think it would probably be better to hear from them directly. But they do feature, there is more of a carve out in their rules for not just active duty military members. There's also a carve out for veterans. And I'm, again, not familiar with the history behind that, whether that's a separate section of state law that allows them to do that, or whether that's something that they feel as though it's already consistent with state and federal requirements and therefore included in their rulemaking authority. I think they would probably be the best to speak to what they feel is within their authority.
Okay.
So what I've done is again, to start with, mirrored the language for the exception for active duty military members.
Mm-hmm.
And so it says a person who resides in Vermont and meets the definition of refugee. And there is, to my knowledge, no state definition of refugee. This is a federal definition. It's a federal term. And it's found in Title 8 of the United States Code in Section 1101 A42. And it's a long definition. I'm happy to share it if you want it. Upon arrival in Vermont and for the period of residency in Vermont, be considered a resident for in-state tuition purposes at the start of the next semester or academic period. I will say that the attorney in our Office of Legislative Counsel who handles matters related to refugees is Becky Wasserman, and I checked with her just to make sure that I had the right refugee definition. We chatted a little bit about the fact that when we're talking about asylum seekers or refugees, those terms can be thrown around in the public sphere and not necessarily mean the same thing when we get down to definitions. So for example, I heard the committee when we started talking about this bill, or this concept applying mainly to the Afghan refugees who are coming in and being resettled in Vermont, and that's kind of what spurred this discussion. There's a possibility that those folks that you're talking about are not actually refugees under this definition. They're here on a humanitarian parole program, which means they don't fit under this definition, and it just gets. There are other definitions relating to non-US citizens who are here for various different reasons, including asylum seekers. So depending on who the committee means to sweep into this category could really change the definitions we need to refer to and how, who falls into those definitions and if that is the committee's intent.
Okay. Why don't you There we go. So right now, refugees that are coming in from Afghanistan are referred to, would you repeat that? Or referred to as?
So, and this is just a tiny bit of research. I am
please.
not an authority on this, but my understanding is they're coming to us under a humanitarian parole or probation program, and may not qualify under this federal definition of refugee. I would be happy to do more research on it, or perhaps Becky, I don't want to volunteer her, but as the attorney who works in this area of the law, she may be able to speak far more eloquently to it than I am. But I do think it's worth noting from the get-go that because we, as lay people, are referring to a community with one term, doesn't mean it meets the federal definition or the state definition. In this case, it would be federal. So it would be important to really think about who are the people you're trying to capture here. And so that we can, if this is something that needs to be done in state law, make sure that we get those definitions right.
It's a great point. It's a really great point. I appreciate it. And I think as we're going to hopefully hear from Joyce Judy tomorrow, and I'll ask Daphne to reach out to the state colleges and UVM to understand both the process that they would recommend, as you mentioned, how to do this work, and then who they in their minds also are trying to capture with this. Senator Terenzini.
This question's for you, I guess, Senator Campion. So just for my own understanding, you're proposing that, for example, the Afghan refugees relocating here, they wouldn't have to wait the 1 year period to be considered in state or out of state for different tuition pricing purposes, correct?
Yeah, that's basically the conversation I had with Joyce Judy, as I recall it. And I do think I would also add that as we talk about this, I think it's also good for us all to just revisit this conversation in general. So the answer is yes. But for example, why are we making anybody wait? You know, to be honest, I mean, yeah, that's just my only follow-up to that is, you know, it's kind of, hey, if you're moving here, I don't want you going, at least in my community, over to Hudson Valley Community College, you know,
right,
for something. I want you right here. Go to CCV. I don't want, you know, so I think it raises that question as well.
That was, if I could follow up, that was exactly my point. That was exactly my point right now is as we know, we have a population problem, a workforce problem, and everything else. Why, if I move here from New Hampshire with my family, for example, why wouldn't I just on day one be able to take advantage of the better rates rather than going to a school in New York or New Hampshire, wherever else? Let's just do it for everyone. Yeah.
Now, so as usual, you and I are on the same page. So yeah, no, I think it's a good point. And there are some, and this is what we can pull apart with CCV is, I know that there already are some agreements with bordering towns. So for example, in my area, you know, there's, I don't know if it's miles or specific towns that can already benefit from a tuition reduction to CCV that might persuade them, you know, to head east rather than west, which, you know, is the biggest competitor, Hudson Valley Community College. So yeah, I think we put that on the table as well. Why not open this up to everybody? Senator Lyons.
No, I was just going to agree. And we'll probably get pushback on that. But I remember 100 years ago when I moved back into Vermont.
Yeah. And
I could get a job first teaching college before I could go to start my PhD. So it's fascinating discrimination.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Senator Perschlick.
One thing that we heard in committee a couple of years ago when we were talking about early college, I think it was, or dual enrollment in those students that wanted to go out of state, we kind of got into this issue of residency a little bit. And I remember there was a concern about the students that had a parent in Vermont declaring residency. And maybe we don't care about that if somebody's living in a border state but going to school here with in-state tuition and claiming residency because they have a relative that has a home here. So I don't know how residency is defined, if there's a definition of that, or if that's just in the rules that the school has to develop. But it's something we might want to look into.
Yeah, that'd be great. Ms. St. James, if you would look into that a little bit for us. And we'll ask people. Okay. Mr. Little, thanks for being with us. And thanks for listening to the conversation. Before you introduce yourself, I'll just mention and give us your comments. You know, we started this conversation a little bit after a conversation with Joyce Judy around making this kind of change for refugees and asylum seekers. You just heard the comments from Elizabeth St. James, and now our idea of, you know, is it time to open this door a bit more? I suspect with some students, you know, financial aid, if you're paying that out-of-state tuition, if you've lived here 9 months and applying for financial aid, you're getting into a tuition reduction program that may or may not bring you down to the in-state tuition, all those kinds of things. So with that, I'll just pass it over to you for the next 10 minutes and get your thoughts.
Certainly. Tom Little, General Counsel at Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. Good afternoon. And I convey the apologies of both Marilyn Cargill and Scott Giles, who are otherwise booked this afternoon. Interestingly, as the General Counsel at Vsac, there have been times over the last 17 or 18 years when I have been asked by Vsac to look at, I guess, what we call residency appeals. And these are students generally who have been determined by Vsac to not be eligible for the various Vsac grant programs that are restricted to Vermont resident students. And there is an internal to Vsac appeal process. One of the rules is that you can't move to Vermont for the purpose of going to college here and establish residency at the same time. And there aren't very many appeals, generally speaking. I think that rule is pretty well understood, but at times there are special cases or, you know, weird variations. The Vsac rule and the application or interpretation of it has always pretty much aligned with that of the University of Vermont and the state colleges. I have a little more experience with that of the university than I do with the state colleges, but when you think about the tuition differential between in-state and out-of-state tuition, those institutions have been very careful about residency because the business models for them depend to a significant extent on charging more money to non-resident students. And if they spied a slippery slope coming at them that would make it harder for them to maintain that distinction, they would be concerned about the economics of it. And as I indicated, the Vsac statutes make it clear that the Vsac grant programs are for Vermont resident students, and you can't move here in August and start going to UVM or the state colleges in September and expect to get in-state tuition.
If I may, just sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking to myself, and I'll just say it aloud, I might be able to see where UVM's coming from with their admissions numbers, but with the state colleges, this could be the out of the box kind of thinking that they might need it might help them. I mean, to be known as, geez, move to Vermont and immediately get in-state tuition. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
That's a good point, and I am not familiar with, I toss the word business model around a bit loosely there. Vsac ran into something like this years ago with the Somali refugee population that had come into the greater Burlington area, Burlington, Winooski, South Burlington, and we're looking, at least some of them, and I think we need to keep in mind that if we have 300 or 400 Afghanistan refugees, they're not all going to be applying to go to the state colleges at the same time. They're presumably a limited number of them, but we ran into some of the same problem, and this was there was a 2 or 3 groups of Chittenden County nonprofits and faith organizations that were trying to help the Somali refugees with getting jobs and getting education, getting driver's licenses, just about everything, housing. And we weren't able to help them because of the statutory issue about residency. I did find through someone at Vsac there's a National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. There's a national association, as you know, for everything. And I can send this to you. I just came across it. It's a tip sheet for financial aid administrators working with refugee and asylum students. The term that this one-page document uses is actually asylee students. And this is focused on the free federal application for student financial assistance, the FAFSA application that is for federal financial aid. And there is it's a one-page summary tip sheet, so it doesn't go into a deep dive, but it does give some guidance about which non-citizen statuses are eligible for federal financial aid. That includes U.S. permanent residents with a permanent resident card, conditional permanent residents, and then there's a regulatory reference for that. Other eligible non-citizens with an arrival-departure record, which I guess is referred to as an I-94, from the Department of Homeland Security, showing any one of the following designations: refugee, asylum granted, indefinite parole, humanitarian parole, or Cuban Haitian entrant. It also covers citizens of the Republic of Palau, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, or the Federated States of Micronesia, which suggests to me, and this National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators is a very reliable, professional group, and they don't put stuff out that isn't something you can generally rely on. It suggests to me that the federal financial aid eligibility may go beyond that federal statutory definition that Beth St. James mentioned to the committee in Title 8 of the United States Code. More research would need to be done by that, but it suggests that perhaps the Department of Homeland Security, or perhaps the U.S. Department of Education, has adopted rules or regulations that go beyond that statutory definition of refugee. We can look into that as well. So we haven't, VSAC hasn't had but about a half a day to think about this, Mr. Chair. I can go into more detail about the Vsac statutes, how those are structured, if you would like. But the only other thing I can mention that may be a slight analogy is that there's a Vermont National Guard program that is a refundable or forgivable interest-free loan that functions as a scholarship if you are join the Guard and complete all of your Guard commitments for basic training and years of service. You can get a very significant benefit towards tuition. That is not restricted to Vermont resident members of the Vermont Guard. And that was in particular because the Guard recruits and has members of the Vermont Guard who live in New York, New Hampshire, and probably a few other states. So that's not directly on point, but it's might be good for the committee to know.
That is helpful. I think it makes sense now to pause to get questions. And Elizabeth St. James, I think there are a number of things that would be great for you to bring back to us as outlined by Mr. Little and others. And we'll also hear from CCV hopefully tomorrow. But for now, do I see any questions for either Mr. Little or Ms. St. James? Senator Hooker.
One of the things I'd like to know from Joyce Judy is the number or the percentage of non-residents that go to CCV.
Yeah.
You know, what are we looking at as far as what does that look like presently?
It's a great question. Yeah. Anything else right now for either Ms. St. James or Mr. Little? Anything else from you, Tom, at this point?
I just would add, apropos the last bill the committee looked at, I attended Burlington High School. Our mascot are the seahorses. And we seem to be okay with that one. And that came when they excavated for the high school that was built in 1919. They found fossil evidence from when the Great Sea was here in the valley of seahorses.
Huh.
And there have been times when when I was in high school, the football coach tried to change it. It was masculine or macho enough, right. And he was shouted down.
So Burlington is still the seahorses?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
At times the depiction of the mascot is a little more muscular than it may be.
Well, you know, listen, seahorses are very special because the males carry the young.
Right.
So so they represent some forward thinking.
Senator Chittenden, please.
If I'm not mistaken, the football clubs in Burlington and South Burlington weren't large enough to have their own, so they've actually, I thought I heard that they are the Sea Wolves, because
yes.
We've even kept Sea Horses as part of the amalgamation of the Sea Wolves. Go Sea Wolves.
That's great. That's great.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation, and all.
Mr. Little, it's always great to see you. Ms. St. James, thank you very much. Committee, any final comments or questions? I know there is a 4:30 training for senators. If you say Senator Persley.
They changed it to 5.
Oh, to 5. Okay. All right. Well, we're still not going to continue on. Anything else? I think we're moving along. I think we're starting to get some focus on some of these things, and hopefully we'll be able to move some stuff out in a couple of weeks. So, okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon, great evening, and we'll see you soon.